In this PowerPoint, we are going to take a closer look at the cultural concept of worldview and ways it can be useful in the recovery field. Every person has a worldview. As a provider, the idea is to have an awareness of our own worldview and actively try to understand and appreciate the various worldviews of our clients. Worldview generally contains two components. The first is how one sees and interprets the world. For example, the meaning we may give to a situation or an interaction, or how we might interpret a specific experience. This is more or less our own personal lens of the world. The second component is how one sees themselves in relation to the world. What is the view they have of themselves and the role and place they may put themselves within a community or society? It's important to remember that one's worldview or parts of a worldview can change and often change repeatedly throughout life. For example, how one may view a particular situation can change as a person's perception of themselves or others change. This can be especially relevant to situations stemming from addiction and or recovery. When looking at worldview, there are three influences that are valuable to consider. These are human universality, which pertains to aspects of life that are present across all cultures, for example, food; cultural specificity, which is about the patterns and beliefs they may be consistent within a cultural group. Again, using the food example, there may be trends or types of dishes more common or unique to a particular culture. And lastly, individual uniqueness, which focuses on the individual preferences of each person within a cultural group. These three influences are seen as working or being woven together. This is due to the idea that all three, not just one influence, are important to consider when looking at a person's worldview and trying to gain a full understanding of that person. Another importance of incorporating all three is that over-focusing on one area or leaving out one area completely can result in denying similarities that do exist across cultures or reinforcing stereotypes that everyone within a cultural group is the same or has the same beliefs or actions. Focusing on or leaving out one of the influences can result in an inaccurate view. To give more specific examples, leaving out human universality can actually cause one to forget the similarities that may exist across cultures, while only focusing on human universality can often mean not acknowledging the differences or unique aspects from one cultural group to another. With cultural specificity, leaving this out would deny that there can be patterns and behaviors common to a specific cultural group, but then over-focusing on this influence could lead to a type of stereotyping or belief that each culture is so specific that there are no similarities across groups. Lastly, leaving out individual uniqueness would again potentially lead to stereotyping or a lack of recognition that each person is unique within a cultural group, and over-focusing would lead to ignoring patterns and habits that may be similar within a group or across cultural groups. Worldview can often be broken down into specific dimensions or aspects. Again, keeping in mind that having an awareness of these dimensions is beneficial both for ourselves as well as our clients. Some of the dimensions include modality, which relates to how one or a group views human activity. For example, is it enough to be a human being, meaning having value just on ourselves as a person, or are we only valued by what we produce or do in the world? The second one is axiology, which looks at what do we believe in and value in our life. In addition, what types of priorities and life roles do we choose? The third, logic, addresses the reasoning one uses to solve problems and the conclusions we make about something being true or false. Ontology, which is the next dimension, looks at the nature and reality of existence. For example, some cultural perspectives may say that what is real or exists is only based on evidence and can what actually be seen or touched. Other cultural views may say that a part of reality is the unseen and includes value regarding intuition and the intuitive mind. The next, concept of time, this can be relevant to one's worldview in a variety of ways. One is that a culture may have a specific preference or focus on the present versus the past, or the past versus the future, or a combination of the present, past, or future. Some individuals and cultures may embrace more of a present-only concept of time. For others, the past may hold a very strong and particular significance. Another factor in the concept of time is the actual role that time itself plays. For example, a worldview that is quote-unquote run by time generally has a rushed pace, a focus on punctuality, and less time for leisure. While a different cultural worldview might have a more fluid pace to life, not feel tied down by a specific time, or there might be a complete omission of time. Similarly, concept of self is important in understanding one's worldview. The concept of self is often looked at as the emphasis one might have on being an individual, or for other cultural groups, identifying more with a collective identity such as a family or a community. For example, within many cultures, there is a sense of, quote-unquote, I am my family or I am my community, as opposed to strictly being defined or identified as just an individual. This translates into how one might make a decision. For example, within some cultural norms, there might be just a thinking of, from an independent perspective, I'm just going to think of what is only in my best interest. While for others, they may address how a choice might impact others in the family or the community, and then making a decision that is best for the collective whole. The last area in worldview is what we call cognitive styles. This is an area that first pertained to learning styles and how we might absorb information. Two specific styles were identified, what we call a field-independent perspective and what we call a field-sensitive or dependent perspective. Within the context of learning field-independent perspectives, they're more oriented towards task of a problems, making sure everyone did their quote-unquote fair share in a project, and promoting independence or competition in a group learning environment. Whereas field-sensitive perspectives are actually more oriented towards aspects vital to the learning process, such as social interactions, providing support to one another, encouragement to others in the group, and showing interest in how others in the group learned. This aspect of field-independent and field-sensitive within worldview was quickly adopted to the human services field and can be applied to recovery services for clients in a variety of ways. In particular, it addresses areas such as communication and motivational styles when interacting with clients. Here, a field-independent perspective would emphasize a client being self-reliant or focus completely on the individual and would emphasize verbal cues, whereas a field-sensitive perspective would take into account others in the client's life and be very aware of focusing on nonverbal as well as verbal cues. Taken together, all these aspects can help us have a more in-depth view of our own worldview and the worldview of our clients. Doing so can allow us to better understand what our clients may value and need from their recovery experience.